Hello and welcome to our live webinar, Digital Learning Unboxed, So Now What? Today we are delighted to be joined by Professor Mark Brown, Director of the Institute for Digital Learning at Dublin City University and the reviewer of our new programme, Enhancing Digital Learning, who will be given a pivotal and timely presentation defining the scope of digital learning and exploring how institutions can fully harness the transformative potential of new digital technologies. So before we begin the presentation, I will introduce you to our speakers. You should be able to see. Firstly, my name is Victoria Montgomery. I'm a marketing executive at Epigeum and will be facilitating today's session. We are also joined by Professor Mark Brown from Dublin City University and Emma Gallen, a commissioning editor at Epigeum. In terms of the agenda for today, I will be shortly handing over to Professor Mark Brown to give his presentation. We will then hear from Emma Gallen, who will give an introduction to Epigeum and what we do, and explore our new Enhancing Digital Learning collaboration opportunity. We will then have time for any final questions that you have for Mark and Emma at the end of the session too. Speaking of questions, everybody attending the webinar today is currently muted to help avoid any audio issues. However, please do get involved at any point and ask any questions you may have. You should all be able to see a control panel for the GoToWebinar software we are using today. The panel is normally at the top or the right-hand side of the screen and can be expanded or hidden by clicking on a white arrow on an orange background. Within the control panel, you should see a questions drop-down where you'll be able to type in your question, which I'll be able to put to our speakers today. So, without further ado, I'm delighted to now hand over to Professor Mark Brown for his presentation, Digital Learning Unboxed, So Now What?
Well, thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen here if I can do so. Well, thanks for the introduction, and hopefully you can all see that screen there. I think the introduction talked about a pivotal and timely. Let's hope I can tick both those boxes. I've probably got a little bit too much to share with you, to be honest. So if we don't get it through everything I had planned, I'm quite relaxed about that, because I think the opportunity is to listen to your comments and questions as much as you listening passively, if you like, down a pipe to me. Though I do encourage you to post your comments and questions, and we'll try to address those throughout the presentation and leave time at the end as well. I'm at a university, Dublin City University, which is quite a young university, and it's a little unusual that we host the National Institute for Digital Learning in a single university. But Ireland's quite a small country, not dissimilar to where I'm originally from, which is New Zealand. So I guess I haven't seen whether we've got participants here from both hemispheres, but my work does engage me in both the Northern Hemisphere as well as the Southern Hemisphere. So hopefully I can touch enough points that are relevant to your particular context. I've got this slide, looks a little egotistical, but because I'm originally from New Zealand, for those of you who are not familiar with rugby, it's a sport here in Ireland that's reasonably popular as well. So here I am precisely 1 year ago to the day wearing an Irish rugby jersey when we hosted the World Conference on Online Learning in Dublin. About 800 delegates from 80 countries. And I guess who could have predicted in such a few months how new technologies would have a huge role to play in our lives and our learning, and I guess now in just our general societies in keeping us going under these challenging times. In response to these challenging times, I was involved with some colleagues in a partnership with FutureLearn in developing this free course on how to teach online. And the reason I'm sharing this with you is that over 85,000 educators from around the world have registered for this course. It was produced in 10 days back in March and April. And it's not about selling the course to you at all. What I want to illustrate is the demand that is around the world, and now in institutions that didn't perhaps exist in universities in particular, for the kind of professional development that enhancing digital learning will hopefully provide. So there's just a huge level of interest perhaps that we didn't have to the same degree. At the same time, I've recently been involved in leading the development of a course for learners. Now, this might be a different focus for Epigeum. I know they've already had a focus in this area, but I just wanted to flag to you that whilst we're talking about enhancing digital learning, we shouldn't lose sight of the learner in this conversation as well. But I'm going to put most of my focus on professional development to really exploit or harness the opportunities that digital learning provide within higher educational contexts. Last little bit of self-promotion, not so much self-promotion actually, just to give you a sense of just how big I think the post-COVID world is going to be in terms of new digital technologies in education. This week we're actually hosting through some professional associations both in Australasia, Australia, New Zealand and in Europe, European Online and Distance Learning Week, Australasian Online and Distance Learning Week, and actually the US National Distance Learning Week starts next week as well. So the 4 professional bodies are collaborating. And there's a lot of free professional development available, recordings from the respective professional websites. But the point in sharing all 3 of those last slides with you is that these are all, in many respects, supply-driven forms of professional development. They're certainly not embedded and anchored into your institutional strategies and integrated alongside the other things you do. And I think that's the real point of difference about the Epigeum courses when done well and when you're involved right at the outset in particular. Okay. Returning to the original title of this talk, using a metaphor that some of you may not be familiar with. I'm not sure that unless you've got relatively young children, teenage children, you may not have heard of the term unboxing, because it has a particular meaning in the internet world and in particular in the YouTube world. So if you haven't heard of unboxing, if I had a little more time and was more familiar with this particular web platform, I would probably have a poll here and ask these sorts of questions. I actually did a talk only a few weeks ago where I used exactly the same questions with a poll. And so rather than have you do the poll, let me share you the results from that talk in Malaysia. You can see that most people saw unboxing as something to do with unwrapping a new piece of technology. Actually, the answer is, I've already probably given it to you, is B. It's something to do with YouTube. And it's quite an interesting and I think an appropriate metaphor on 2 fronts. One is unboxing is about people videoing themselves, typically young children, and YouTube even had to change their terms of conditions as a consequence of this phenomenon. But you videoing yourselves unboxing gifts and presents, and we all know that thrill you get when you are unboxing a gift and you're not sure what's inside it, and then of course sometimes that quick thrill you get goes away. And in many respects, new technology in education is a bit like unboxing. You take the next big thing out of the box, but it kind of, the thrill doesn't last long, and in the end it gets consigned to the cupboard somewhere in your bedroom or in the bottom of the kitchen cabinets and never be seen again. In a similar sense, you could say that in the post-COVID world, what we've done in the last 6 to 9 months is digital learning has come of age, and we've now taken the Jack or the Jill out of the box, as the image suggests, and can we really put it back into the box? So my title about out of the box, I guess, is I don't think we would want to try to put it back into the box, and how can we harness digital education truly? So now what? I'm going to, in the time I have, whiz through really quickly maybe 2 of the 3 sort of areas that I want to touch on. If we get a little bit of time and I'm given some license, we might do the 3rd part, which is about thinking beyond just your institution now. But you can look at the slides if I don't get that far. So without any further ado, perhaps the last thing I'll say before I get into that first section, what is digital learning effectively, is throughout my talk and my own work in thinking about digital learning, I often anchor it in this saying that the light comes through the cracks. So there's a lot of rhetoric, myth and misinformation that we hear about digital learning. And I think anything we do in producing a course on enhancing digital learning needs to navigate its path through a lot of that rhetoric, putting it bluntly. And in terms of gaps, the light coming through the gaps, one of the challenges we have is there are lots of gaps. There's a rhetoric reality gap. There's a sort of gap between the state of the art, what could be done, versus the state of the actual. And then there's always a gap between what we're doing now and what we might be able to do in the future. And it's finding navigating the path through, in particular, this last gap, because I think anything that Epigeum does in this area needs to be future-proofed. And of course, that's the great advantage of being able to adapt it and customize and embed it in your own institution with other strategies, that you're able to future-proof it through your own delivery. But the first thing we need to establish a little bit is, what are we actually talking about when we're referring to digital learning? So I want to just sort of talk you through a few perspectives and definitions, if you like, without being too focused on just the word. But nonetheless, as Robin Williams once said, if you don't believe that words matter, well, actually they do, and they can change the world. So what are we really referring to by digital learning? We've used a lot of terms over the years. Currently, we're talking about online learning a lot, blended learning, technology enhanced learning. Where does digital learning sit in all of this? I'm not sure there is an easy answer, but it is something that the course is going to have to resolve. And if you're involved, you get the opportunity to shape that. Actually, it may not be even the words digital learning that you want to focus on. It might be more about how you define the language in your own institution. And that's, again, one of the advantages of being involved at the outset. There are numerous scholars who have challenged some of the terminology we use, and I'm not going to spend long on this, but perhaps the TEL word, technology enhanced learning, has waned and then come back into fashion over the years. Then blended learning, this is a very recent publication from the last 18 months or so, helping us try to understand what we mean by blended learning. It's not a term that I'm hugely supportive of, because I don't think it really captures a disruptive dimension, which I'm going to talk about more shortly. And then even the word online, if you haven't come across this journal article, very detailed account of how even the word online learning is quite problematic. There is no commonly accepted definition. So this is going to be a challenge. Even if you're involved in doing research, it's a challenge, because if you're asking people to respond and give you their perspectives on the terminology, you can't assume they're all coming from the same viewpoint. This particular study addressed this by actually putting its own definitions at the outset, this Canadian survey, national survey, and then a nice technique was to ask the participants how the terminology that was defined matched their own definitions, both personally and in their own institutions. And I'm sharing this just simply because we can have a risk of talking across each other when we're not using the language in the same way. And the study shows that actually a lot of people have very different viewpoints, and institutions have different definitions or no definition whatsoever. Perhaps if you have no definition, that is quite helpful in some respects, because you get the opportunity to develop something internally. And then right now, in many respects, the term hybrid learning is finding a foothold. Some would argue it's just a variation of blended learning. I quite like to think that hybrid is about where you graft together the qualities of more than one plant, in this case, to get something better. And I think that's the underlying point of the focus on this particular course, to enhance for betterment, not just to continue and make incremental changes from what we've done previously. For those of you in the UK, you may be familiar with this framework that was published only a matter of months ago, back in June, to talk about the different categories or dimensions of digital learning. Actually, there have been many taxonomies published over the years, and one of the challenges for this course is there going to be a single taxonomy that it will underpin the course, or will there be different taxonomies or definitions and frameworks and the like? So I don't have an answer to that, but I'm laying out some challenges in many respects. I'm going to take a pause for a moment. I've probably been talking for 10 minutes or more, and just take a second to see if there are any comments or questions. If Veronica's got anything, Victoria, sorry. And what does digital learning mean for you? So feel free to make any comments or observations here. We'll just take a pause for 30 seconds or pop in with a comment from the other members of the panel.
Nothing through just yet, but yeah, please do use the questions drop down on the GoToWebinar panel.
In many respects, it's a rhetorical question, but it's a question that I think the suite of courses, the professional development you're doing in this area needs to grapple with. I suggest I just continue on, and you can think about that and post anything if you have any thoughts. And I'll just move on to the second part of the talk. I think I'm doing okay for time. I'm going to try and finish in probably the next 10 minutes, I think. Maybe 12 if I can squeeze it in. So what I tried to do in the brief description here was make this distinction between, in many respects, what we've done in the past with new technologies in education is put them into our institutions in part, but not really right into the heart. And I think that's really, again, the intent of what is being developed or proposed to be developed here with Epigeum, digital right to the heart. This is actually a picture of Trinity College here in London. I'm probably being a bit unkind to my colleagues in what is a 500-year-old university. And I put there tongue-in-cheek again around how face-to-face education is seen in many respects still as the gold standard. And people just want to return to traditional face-to-face once the COVID crisis is gone. What a wasted opportunity that would be, effectively. But then when we talk about enhancement, this continuum is a useful framework just to be thinking about here. Are we talking about at the one end just small steps, incremental enhancements, or are we really talking about reimagining, transformation? Perhaps it's probably going to be a bit of both because it'll depend on your institution, but we shouldn't leave this to chance. This should be something that you think about, part or heart. And the degree, and the course will need to do that and have again the opportunity for people at a local level to introduce it in ways that are most appropriate. Some of you may be familiar with this sort of type of diagram that comes out from this model. It's actually quite critiqued in the literature, but nonetheless tongue-in-cheek, bolting on to your institution or unboxing it within your institution. Do you want to just be focusing on enhancements or real transformation, reimagining? Now, that will depend, as I say, very much on your institution and your intents. And these are things that need to be intentional, just not left to chance. And actually, when we're talking about enhancement or transformation, that's a pretty, in some respects, just broad brush language. It's not necessarily that helpful because any university or any higher education organisation, institution is made up of many subparts, subcultures. There's the macro, there's the meso, the micro, and right down to the nano level. You could see that as the individual lecturer or the teacher, instructor. It could even be the student. So all of these elements need to be thought about in a much more holistic approach to thinking about enhancing digital learning. The one key thing I would say at that nano or micro level, if we see that as at the module, unit, course level, subject level, depending on which language you use, is one would like to think that what we're trying to do here is move away from the traditional use of technology, what I often describe as the pump, dump model of digital pedagogy, merely doing what I'm doing right now, talking to you down a pipe, not the best use of new technology as we know. And so this course will need to look at new kinds of learning spaces, both virtual and physical, that engage learners in collaborative forms, interactive forms of learning, to really challenge the way we have taught previously in more traditional ways. Similarly, the course is going to need to focus a lot on assessment, new kinds of assessment. I'm not suggesting at all that there isn't a place for traditional examinations, whether they be in person or now online, but assessment is really core to harnessing the features of digital technologies for new kinds of pedagogies. The truth is, it's an uncomfortable truth that when we come to utilising new technologies in education, too often we're involved in just teaching by telling, or you could think of it as learning by listening, whereas our pedagogical compass, our learning compass, needs to swing between all of these different perspectives. And this is just a an adaptation of something that I've put together over the years to keep things as simple as possible. There isn't a single approach to digital learning, which is why it's actually very complex. In fact, I wouldn't be advocating at all, just in this course, one kind of pedagogy that underpins it, as the seminal publication from the Educational Researcher way back in 1998 makes the point. And in fact, if you want to think about, well, which are the learning theories that we are going to use and draw on, we know that there are just lots of different perspectives on teaching and learning. This comes from the Hotel Project, from a European funded project many years ago, just to give you a sense of all the different perspectives. So the course will have to draw on elements of many of these, but at the same time in a way that's quite practical and accessible for the kind of people that it targets. Similarly, why this is so challenging right now is not only do we have all these different perspectives and theories, but if you haven't seen this publication in EduCourse earlier in the year, here are a range of now free technologies that we have available. We just have so many new technologies, so it becomes incredibly complex when we're thinking about digital learning, particularly at that nano and micro levels. Not to suggest it's not challenging at the other levels, as I'll touch on shortly. Some people have tried to put this into frameworks that help to make sense of the pedagogies. This happens to be the ABC framework, learning design framework, based on Diana Laurelard's conversational theory. It's something we use in our own institution. But even then, there's a risk of this being just too complicated at the practitioner level. So we're going to have to navigate through that in the development of the course. Ultimately, from my perspective, what I think is most important is understanding that we're talking about here trying to challenge and transform mindsets, not necessarily introducing lots of new technologies and teaching skill sets, but really focusing on a shift in mindset. And that's a really key message I think I'd want to see a course capture. If I lift up a little bit to, say, the meso level or even the macro level in an organization, we also need to understand, in thinking about how we harness digital learning, that there's a whole new learning ecology that we have to think beyond just learning on campus in a traditional class. Actually, learning now, as we have experienced, is off campus in class as well. And digital learning involves a leakage across those two quadrants, in addition to learning on campus out of class and off campus out of class. All four of these quadrants will, in one way or another, make up the areas of thinking about how you enhance teaching and learning through digital technologies. The off-campus, out-of-class one, just to give you an example, there are now services that are available to learners like writing support, feedback on written assignments, coaching, online coaching services. These are not necessarily offered by universities, but might be desirable for our learners to take advantage of. So that's an example of off-campus, out-of-class learning driven by the learner. Ultimately, I mentioned Diana Laurillard previously, using new digital technologies to improve education is not rocket science. It's much, much harder than that. And I guess that's another reason why this course is going to be important, because it isn't an easy thing to do on your own in your own institution. I say this from my own experience of the team that we have, and having the collective input of the people that would be involved in the development of an Epigeum course is really powerful, because that's something you just wouldn't be able to do if you're working on your own with your own team. Coming to the end of this piece, I've got an eye on the time here. I'm currently involved in a project with the European Universities Association where we're trying to develop some tools to help institutions and universities, higher education institutions, to really try to take digital learning one step further, digital teaching and learning, I should really emphasize. So we've looked at a number of different tools that exist. Some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with these tools. We've actually reviewed 20 of these different frameworks or tools that are used to kind of work out what does it take to be successful, and also what kind of KPIs, what key performance indicators should be looking at. So the first one, ACO, came from Australia. This one comes from the Online Learning Consortium in, Quality Matters, not the Online Learning Consortium. They have one as well, but from the United States. Here's one that my own university was involved in developing with some European partners called the Embed blended education model, trying to look at the different levels and components that make up a really rich digital learning ecology. Actually, though, in the project, in reviewing these 20 different frameworks and tools, we would argue that you just can't take something off the shelf like that and think it's going to work or because it looks good. And emphasizing again the value of working with Epigeum is where you are able to customize and embed the frameworks in your own institutional context. So you have a hybrid in that respect, in many respects. I've got an eye on the time. I've probably only got 3 or 4 minutes to finish off the last part. So what I might do is just push on and then pick up these questions. But the question here is really for you to be thinking about, and how the course will need to consider what kind of structures, what kind of leadership structures and unit structures do you really need to harness blended learning in your institution. Again, there's no one size fits here or model or recipe to it. So in the space of 3 minutes, if I think I've got a bit of time, I may as well just finish off as I had planned, because a lot of what I've been talking about is working on where you are now and making some assumptions that teaching and learning isn't changing radically. We're just trying to harness the potential of new digital technologies. But I do want us to be thinking a little out of the box here, and hopefully this course will have that eye on the future as well. This particular study from a year or so ago looked at university strategies for digital learning, or technology enhanced learning in this case, and ideally anything you're going to be doing in your university is going to be aligned to your strategy. Interestingly, very few of these strategies that were analysed had a particular focus on disruption, if you like. And that's one of the things that digital technologies have done in other parts of our lives and societies. How do we harness some of that disruptive element in higher education looking to the future? In the same DigiHE project I mentioned previously, we've worked with the European Universities Association to survey European universities, over 300 responses. And interestingly, many more universities now have strategies. That first point where the original survey in 2014 only found 50% of universities with strategies. Now it's more like 80%. But I wonder if those strategies are capturing the out-of-box aspect that I want to touch on. And in many respects, what keeps us in the box is what's referred to as the iron triangle. It's incredibly hard to do 3 things all at once: increase quality, increase access, and reduce cost. Typically, if we reduce cost, we reduce quality. We might increase access, but we can't do all 3 things. How can we be more disruptive through new technologies to break the iron triangle, if you like? Many universities are doing this through partnerships, and so I want to just touch on the fact that actually we shouldn't be just thinking about needing to work within our own institution. Here's an example of the growth of partnerships in universities worldwide in recent times. My own university has been actively pursuing, as I showed at the outset, partnerships with FutureLearn and using micro-credentials. Our first micro-credential launched earlier in the year as a play space to try to use digital technologies to push boundaries. It doesn't mean that you have to do that through FutureLearn. There are lots of different ways of doing that. We're also trying to push boundaries in a European consortium funded by the European Commission, quite handsomely funded for about €7 million, to bring universities together to share courses and develop micro modules that we can share with each other. So new business models. And then finally, the last example from my own institution is working with an organization in the US called InStride, where we're trying to register or enroll cohorts of learners who are coming from corporates. Some of you may have heard of the Starbucks initiative that Arizona State is doing. So a completely different business model for digital learning. Coming to the conclusion, and in particular, if you're looking at how you can enhance your operation, your business, if you like, through new digital technologies, the point I want to make here is that perhaps the strategy isn't where the focus needs to be, because ultimately it's going to be about the organizational culture of your institution. And if there's one takeaway, I gave you one about the importance of mindsets. there's one last takeaway here. It's that if you haven't got the right kind of organizational cultures, I'll say cultures because there's lots of subcultures, then in many respects, you're not going to harness those opportunities. So that's a very important point. And so there's a question here about whether you need a separate strategy for digital learning or whether it's just woven throughout your institutional culture. Very final point, I probably said I had a final point. Actually, the final point is I've reached the conclusion, and maybe I've got tired of thinking, but more probably accurate, I've run out of time for more, and hopefully I've sown some seeds in this little bit of PowerPoint by karaoke in many respects. If there was one final takeaway from my New Zealand roots, irrespective of what terminology we might talk about, because I think we shouldn't get too hung up on the terms. What I would like to see is the opportunity to really be bold. This is a chance in the post-COVID world to develop a course of professional learning for our educators that gets them to really think outside of what they've been doing in the past to truly be transformative. And on that note, I'm going to stop and have time for conversation. Hopefully, it's hard for me in this system to check what's been coming through on the chat, so I'm going to rely upon a little pause and any moderator's input at this stage. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Mark. I had a question. So you highlighted the importance of that shift in mindset. Could you speak a little to how you've attempted to do that at your own institution?
Yes, and I wouldn't necessarily say overly successfully. I think this is one of those things, there isn't an end point. And that's an important message, perhaps, before I come to the heart of your question, is one of the risks with those of you, depending on what role you're in talking with your line managers or your colleagues about whether this course on enhancing digital learning is right for your university or your institution, is it can be too easy for people in senior leadership roles to say, oh yes, we'll do that, tick the box, and we've done it. So for me, that comes back to that culture. This is not an end game here. This is an ongoing commitment to continuous development. In my own institution, what we've tried to do is place a focus away from what I referred to previously as supply-driven professional development to much more of a needs-driven approach to really anchor the professional learning in the needs of our staff, and doing that also moving away from working with individuals to working with groups. So in my own previous experience in working with colleagues to help with their professional learning, to support their professional learning, what we've done with Epigeum courses is not just relied upon the content that's on the platform, but actually bringing the staff together to talk about their experience as they've worked through that. And then particularly, those staff are not just randomly selected, they might come from a particular program that we want to redesign and redevelop, or even a new program, so that we're doing this where there's an outcome. That's one of the challenges, is it's great just to have the opportunity, if you have time, to work your way through some professional development. But that question I asked at the beginning, so what? So this comes back at an institutional level to be asking questions about, well, what are your indicators that you're actually making progress? What are the key performance indicators? For some, it may be around the student satisfaction, and it's probably going to be a suite of things. And I would be expecting that this course would be identifying the kind of metrics that you should be looking at as indicators of enhancement.
Thank you. In the interest of time, we'll carry on, but just to reiterate that if you do have any questions, please use the questions panel, and then we can come back to those at the end of the session or answer your questions directly afterwards. Thank you so much, Mark, for that presentation. I'd like to now hand over to Emma, who will be giving us an introduction to our Enhancing Digital Learning collaboration opportunity.
Thanks, Victoria. And good morning, everybody. I'm really pleased to introduce to you today our brand new programme and opportunity for collaboration, Enhancing Digital Learning. But just to give you a little bit of background on what we do first. So Epigeum was founded at Imperial College London in 2005 and has been part of Oxford University Press since 2015. And we're a leading provider of interactive online training courses that support the core activities of universities and colleges. Our courses are developed using evidence-based learning design and through a unique process of global collaboration between subject experts, partner institutions, and in-house specialists. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in a moment. Our programs fall into 4 key areas. So research, studying, support and wellbeing, and teaching and development. And the program I'll be talking about today falls into this 4th area on teaching. So over much of this year, we've carried out a lot of research and had many conversations with universities to find out what would be most helpful in supporting them and their staff with the next steps in digital teaching and learning. And what these conversations have told us is that universities really have made fantastic progress in transitioning to digital over some time, but of course, most rapidly over the last 8 months. There's often pockets of excellence or pockets of innovation where the teaching staff who are most confident and experienced are demonstrating quite innovative practice at the moment, while this might be quite new to others. And a common priority across universities right now is to build on this progress and look more strategically towards the digital transformation of teaching and learning across the whole institution to improve student access and engagement, and to equip staff with the right support and the confidence to drive their digital learning strategy. So acknowledging these points, our new programme Enhancing Digital Learning won't be that emergency course that helps teaching staff to move rapidly online. That's already happened. It will very much move beyond the progress already made in a future-facing way to help that enable that process of institution-wide digital transformation that Mark's just spoke about by supporting all teaching and learning support staff to increase their knowledge, skills and confidence in taking a digital-first approach to their practice and their pedagogy. So by completing the modules, learners will be able to transform their course design and delivery with digital as an inherent and effective part. They'll recognise the opportunities in and barriers to learning through online and blended modes of delivery and develop strategies to maximise the affordances and handle the challenges. They'll be able to create accessible, inclusive and engaging learning experiences, build confidence in evaluating the pedagogical value of digital technologies and approaches, and embedding a variety of tools in their practice. And importantly, they'll be able to continuously evaluate their teaching practice and engage in a process of improvement and innovation. We'll be taking a micro-learning approach to the training. So comprising 5 hours in total, the asynchronous programme will be made up of 24 very concise modules at around 10 to 15 minutes each, which can be dipped into at point of need. And this really takes in feedback that many staff are struggling with workload right now, so actually fitting in training can be a key concern. And these bite-sized modules and the flexible structure of the programme will allow members of staff to navigate straight to the content they need, anytime, anywhere, and to determine their own pathway through the content. The modular structure will also facilitate the embedding of these materials in existing institutional initiatives with the aim of enhancing institutions' current provision with high-quality interactive online support. We're aiming for quite a comprehensive topic coverage. So as well as the core essentials in teaching, such as course design or assessment, the programme will include topics of increasing importance and where we're starting to see a lot of innovation happening at the moment. For example, in creating online learning communities, evaluating the pedagogical value of technologies, including new and emerging technologies, accessibility and inclusion, digital well-being and safety, and preparing students for an increasingly digital world of work. The learning design will be specifically tailored for this audience to promote knowledge and skills acquisition and to build their confidence. And so this will include plenty of examples and real-life case studies of good practice and innovation. And our research has shown that this is particularly important to teaching staff now. They'd like to see examples on which they can model their own practice. It'll include real staff and student voices and perspectives, video, interactive graphics and activities, professional animations, and scenario-based learning. And again, that'll provide opportunities for learners to model their practice. Each module will finish with a short end-of-module assessment, which will be tied to the learning outcomes to consolidate the learning and can be used to generate certificates. and there will be portfolio activities on top of the core activities. So that will give further depth of learning and reflection, and plus an additional opportunity for authentic assessment. We're really pleased to be working with Professor Kevin Ashford-Rowe, who is the Pro Vice Chancellor of Digital Learning at Queensland University of Technology, and he's going to be the lead advisor for our programme. So Kevin is already bringing his significant expertise to the programme development, and he'll oversee the vision, the scope and the direction of the programme at each stage. And so while Kevin wasn't able to join us in person for today's webinar, he has sent a short video message that we should be able to share with you now.
Hi, I'm Kevin Ashford-Rowe, Pro Vice Chancellor of Digital Learning here at Queensland University of Technology. As the Pro Vice Chancellor of Digital Learning, my role is to support and enable the university to achieve a digital-first approach to learning and teaching that offers students contemporary learning and teaching experiences, and also academics the opportunity to ensure that their teaching delivery is presented in, again, contemporary means. I actually think that we are increasingly moving into a digital world, and that digital transformation is a phrase that is increasingly informing our practice and our thinking around the ways in which we start to unpack the learning and teaching experience. This for us means a move from being digital in part, which is where we use technologies to effectively mimic or replace essentially analog processes, to being more truly digital at heart in a transformative way. And what that means is ensuring that the technologies are used in the best ways with the best affordances available to enable students to improve their ability to gain access to their learning and teaching experience. I think that the Enhancing Digital Learning package from Epigeum is a very important stepping stone and an opportunity to gain the professional development that you want to assist in this digital transformation in a well-designed, well-thought-out and well-structured way. I would encourage all of you who are thinking about digital transformation at the institutional level to engage with this project, and in the hope that I look forward to working with some of you at a future point. Thank you.
I think Kevin's message there chimes very nicely with some of the things that Mark has spoken about earlier, so very interesting to hear that. So to tell you a little bit about our development process, so our approach is very iterative and collaborative at Epigeum. The diagram here on the slide shows the key stages of the publication process, and we work alongside leading subject specialists across each of these stages. We're currently assembling our team of authors and reviewers, and I am so pleased to say that the team is already looking very strong with some key international experts in the field involved, and there's a definite buzz of enthusiasm at the moment among them about diving straight into the course development. An important part of our approach is that we invite and partner with a development group of institutions who are able to feed into the shape and content of the developing materials to make sure that the training will meet their own institutional requirements. So these institutions pay a one-off fee and will then receive a campus-wide unlimited subscription to the programme on publication, a cost-sharing model that does represent a significant long-term saving in comparison to what it would cost an institution to purchase an annual subscription of the programme. They will also receive ongoing tailored implementation support from our team of learning consultants as well. So the invitation is now open for institutions to join our development group for the Enhancing Digital Learning programme and to collaborate with us on the development of some very key stages with publication plans for December 2021. The process will kick off with an online workshop in the spring, where all collaborating institutions and the expert author team join together to review and discuss the content plans for each module. And this workshop is always a really great event. Participants usually welcome very productive and positive spirited discussions, as everyone is really working towards that common goal of making the programme as good as it can be. It's also a really nice opportunity to work with some of the leading figures in the field and to share good practice with other universities, and of course to contribute your input in how the modules should be further developed. The author team will then write up the full modules based on the workshop feedback, and the development group then get that exciting first look at the draft online content in its interactive form, and again an opportunity to provide feedback for the revisions before receiving access to the programme on publication. Okay, thanks very much.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Emma. So if you are interested in finding out more about the opportunity to collaborate on the development of enhancing digital learning, you can find the digital flyer within the handout section of the webinar panel. And please do also visit our website page with the URL on the screen now. We will also be in touch with you directly with the recording of this webinar as soon as it's available, so you'll be able to ask any further questions then too. Brilliant. So now we have time for some of the final questions and comments that have come through for both Professor Mark Brown and for Emma. So I'll just read out a few. So first, a comment for and question for Mark from Paul, who has said, thank you for the talk, Mark. Very interesting and useful to hear about the different projects. Do you have any findings about key needs and expectations from the student side?
Actually, I could talk at some length about that, because the particular course that we offered for students prior to the start of the new academic year here in Europe, we did quite a lot of research. In fact, we designed the course with students, by students, and even co-facilitated with students. And if there's one takeaway, I think, from our experience that we would want to bring into the course development, and this applies to both students and also our academic community, is the importance of the emotional side of learning. That we've all experienced this, I think, in different ways. And so the students made it really clear to us that they needed more support on what was often referred to as the affective dimensions of learning. On that particular course, we had over 1,000 students who completed a survey that went alongside the course. Notably, just to give you a sense of the demand and the need for us to almost understand that digital skills now are an important life skill. They're not something that we should just leave to osmosis. So we might design using the digital from a teaching perspective, but we have to be thinking about our learners. So MOOCs often come under a lot of criticism for their completion rates and so on. Of 5,000 plus learners who registered for that course, over 50% completed the course, and actually over 1,400 in my own institution went through to take the certificate of completion. Now, again, it's not that particular course that's the point here. It's about the need for the student to have some support in this area. And I think that would be a nice feature to capture in the structure of the suite of professional development courses that come under the umbrella of this packet initiative, is bringing in the views of the student. So what is it that the students really want? In Ireland, we had a national survey. It was actually conducted in November last year, published right in the middle of our sort of crisis as such in June, July, I think it was. And what was fascinating about the survey, it was a survey of staff and students. The staff described the tools that they use for digital teaching. And it's on a Wordle with a handful of things, core tools. We all know about the VLE or the LMS. And the students were asked exactly the same thing, and their Wordle had hundreds of different tools. So there's just a mismatch in thinking about what we can use for our learning. A long-winded answer there, but actually, yes, really important that we capture that student input.
Brilliant, thank you. There's a question here for Emma. Would you consider this Enhanced Digital Learning Programme as an OPM organisation?
As a what organisation, sorry?
OPM organisation.
I'm afraid I'm not familiar with that acronym. Could the questioner elaborate, please?
Paul, do you want to put in another comment into the chat, and then
it's effectively in more contemporary language, we're actually now talking about OPXs as a kind of hybrid model, and I touched on this toward the end about partnerships. So you can feel free to come in around the Epigeum, but since we have some experience ourselves around this, our partnership with FutureLearn is not something where we're a client, but we're actually part of a relationship with other, not just FutureLearn. Actually, one of the most powerful reasons we're involved is because of the partnership with other universities. So that's very different from someone who's contracting into an OPM to deliver your courses for you. And so in the case, I was going to make this point, in our experience in working with Epigeum. Yes, the courses you get and the way you embed them have great value, but actually equally of value is the network of universities that you're able to work with. And that we have long-term relationships that we've built up through the partnership with Epigeum. So in that sense, I think it's really important you don't see it as a client relationship, client-customer type relationship. It's actually being part of a network where you're able to work in a very flat structure and truly influence the course design, which is, again, very different from what you would be doing if you were in a more traditional OPM sort of relationship.
Thanks for covering that, Mark.
I've also learned a new acronym today, so it's always good. Okay, another comment come through from Ken saying, "Hi Mark, good to hear from you as always. I agree with you about blended being a poor descriptor for digital education. And the unboxing term was well timed as he just unboxed the new pair of headphones that arrived whilst he was on the webinar." Very good timing. Fabulous, thank you. Oh, thank you, Paul, for sending through your elaborations on the term. One last thing, Mark, I was wondering if you would be able to speak a little to your own experience collaborating with Epigeum before, to be able to put that into context for anybody that might be interested now in enhancing digital learning.
Yes, well, I certainly think that this is a very timely suite of courses, because I emphasize that you're not just getting a single course here. Now, the language is often used in different ways, because in Australia the word course has a different meaning, but I'm referring to short courses. The real value in the suite, the package, I think, is what was referred to previously, is that you get the ability to customize and adapt that and build it in alongside of what you're already doing. And if you're here thinking that you've got a solution that you're just going to be able to say, here we are, we're going to make this available for the staff, and now we can say they're going to learn how to use digital learning, that's not really the right mindset. It has to be really fully infused through the other things you do. And as I mentioned in my own previous example, where we would have some face-to-face interaction with the staff, get them to reflect on the experience they may have had working through a module the previous week, or one of the subtopics or themes. And so it's really important, if you do commit, that you think very carefully about how you integrate it into your particular institution. And actually Epigeum helps you with that, because you even get a guide on ways and the experience of how others have done this. What we know fundamentally is that all you do is take the suite of courses and put them into your VLE or LMS and say to the staff, here they are. That's a supply-driven model of professional development. Will they come? Some, but probably not the ones you need. So really important that that's what you get from the network, with working with other institutions with exactly the same challenges, and the kind of creative solutions that they come up with as well. So I think this is very much, I use the word hybrid, but I'm using it in a different context from how I used it previously with blended learning. You get a hybrid model here, which really taps into the international expertise and the research and examples of fantastic practice that is happening around the world, but you get to localize it in a way that makes sense for the staff that you work with.
Brilliant, thank you.
Just to follow up on a couple of those comments there, that initial workshop that I mentioned is a really great opportunity to meet some of the other institutions that will be collaborating with you, and you can build that list of contacts. But obviously it doesn't stop there. You can, you've made those contacts at that point, and you can continue corresponding with them throughout the process of embedding the courses into your institution. And our team of learning consultants as well provide very tailored support for individual institutions. They will visit you physically or virtually, depending on where we are in the world. And yeah, they can draw on their experience of working with many institutions on embedding different courses into their own systems and initiatives, and draw on different types of institutions' experience there too.
If I make one other observation, because this is a challenge, and some people may be thinking, well, why would we need to pay for a suite of courses when there are so many free resources out there these days? I personally don't see the open and closed worlds in two different parallels that don't connect. The real difference, having experienced this firsthand as a lead advisor and author of Epigeum courses in the past, is when you're operating and you've got customers, clients, people, universities who have paid a reasonable amount of money. The process we work through, where this is something very carefully managed, storyboarded very precisely, that is not my experience in the open world, where you might throw something together and make it just available. This is really carefully thought through. In some respects, it's like when you produce a book, you hate the editor because it keeps coming back and keeps coming back. But ultimately, the product that you get from all the input and the peer review that you get, again, a lot of those open resources that exist there, not to dismiss them because they can also be linked out to in the course, but they haven't had that kind of peer review. They haven't been thought through carefully enough, and also in closing the loop. So one of the things about good professional learning is, if you're going to introduce a video to someone to watch, which is powerful, what are they going to do with it? What action will they take? So that closing the loop, thinking, well, what would they need to do next? All of that is very carefully thought through. And again, in my own experience, some of that experience actually we've brought into our own course design model for our own delivery, which to give it much more shape as a learning design framework, if you like.
Thank you, Mark. We've had one final comment come through from Zariah, which I think is a very good conclusion to today's session, which says, we as teachers need to switch our minds when teaching and learning, since the world has changed and students now have a more active role. I think the courses might help us to become more competent to the world's current demands, which I think is extremely true. If you do have any other questions, as I mentioned before, we'll be in touch with the recording of the webinar as soon as possible, so you'll be able to ask anything more then. And so all that's left to say is thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you found it really insightful. I want to thank Mark again for your presentation, and Emma as well for the great introduction to enhancing digital learning. Please do follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. You can search for Epigeum, and do visit our website for more information about us and our other programs too. And I hope that you have a lovely rest of your day.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.